What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Today we are going to be talking about one of the fathers of West Virginia and the only governor of Reorganized Virginia, Francis Pierpont. So last year, to mark West Virginia Day, I did an entire episode on how West Virginia became a state. One of the individuals we talked about heavily in that video was Francis Pierpont, and I kind of decided that he needed his own episode based entirely around him, so that's what we're going to do today. So, old Frankie Pierpont was born in Morgantown, a city that was founded by his great-grandfather, Zackwell Morgan. At a young age, his family would move to Marion County, where he would spend the majority of his adult life. He was educated in a small schoolhouse in Marion County, and in his 20s went to Allegheny College in Pennsylvania. Some accounts I found stated that he walked to Allegheny College, but considering that's up around Lake Erie and 60 hours away, I kind of doubt that. I hope he didn't walk. I'm not doubting he could have walked, I just hope he didn't. Upon graduating, he began studying law and passed the West Virginia bar exam in 1841. Pierpont began to be heavily involved with his community of Fairmont and Marion County as a whole. He was a lawyer for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. He was active in the Methodist Church. He ran his family tannery business. He helped establish the Fairmont Male and Female Seminary, which would later become Fairmont College and is now Fairmont State. Oddly enough, the only recognition he gets for that is his name is attached to Pierpont Community College, which is odd, but he funded the creation of a coal mine on his property. Now, this coal mine would later expand and become part of the Consolidation Coal Company, later just Consol Coal. He also regularly interacted with active Virginian politicians. Remember, of course, at this point, Virginia and West Virginia were one giant state. It was also at some point during this period that he went on a trip to the Deep South, and after seeing the treatment of slaves, became an avid abolitionist. Try saying avid abolitionist 5 times. It's a tricky one. While he was very much against Virginia seceding from the Union, he also saw the separation of the western counties from Maine, Virginia as being heavily unconstitutional. During the first Wheeling Convention, and again, I recommend if you haven't, go back and watch the How West Virginia Became a State video, where I go into more detail about the Richmond Convention and the first 2 Wheeling Conventions. He spoke out openly about immediate separation from Virginia before Virginia formally seceded from the Union. A month later, after Virginia had formally seceded from the Union, Pierpont went back to Wheeling for the second Wheeling Convention. It was at this one that the Declaration of the Rights of the People of Virginia was adopted. Now, this called for an immediate mass firing of all Virginian elected officials, because why should loyal West Virginians, or people who lived in the western counties of Virginia, it gets very muddled and confusing. Why should Union loyalists have to answer to politicians who don't even want to be part of the United States? Pierpont became the first and only governor of the restored state of Virginia, and he immediately went to work taking care of his executive duties. This included raising money for this new government and creating a loyalist military within this new territory of Western Virginia. At this point, this new government had the support of Abraham Lincoln, and it appeared like this government could eventually even become its own state. Now, this entire time, the Civil War was raging on, and it was getting closer and closer to the Pierpont homestead. The attempted destruction of the Harper's Ferry Federal Arsenal during the early days of the Civil War, actually before the Civil War started, well, that was almost 30 hours away from Fairmont. And then you fast forward a little bit, you have the first major skirmish of the American Civil War, the Battle of Philippi. Well, that took place only about 30 miles away from Fairmont, which was at this point only about a 10-hour trip on foot. If you had a good horse, you could probably do it in an afternoon. On April 20th, 1863, Lincoln signed an insurance of statehood proclamation ensuring that West Virginia would be admitted to the Union as a 35th state after a 60-day period. Now, I've not been able to find anything over whether or not these events were related, but the very next day, April 21st, 1863, 3,500 Confederate troops, primarily made up of cavalry and fast-moving troops under the control of General W.E. Jones, launched a campaign into modern-day northern West Virginia. This would be the last major campaign by the South into what is now northern and north-central West Virginia. And this campaign had three major goals: to destroy important infrastructure, including train bridges and resource stockpiles. This was basically to try and slow down the advance and movement of Union troops. The second was to recruit pro-Confederate supporters in the western counties. And third was to demoralize and terrorize the young government that was being established by the western counties. This campaign would bring the Civil War right to Francis Pierpont's doorsteps. On April 29, 1863, Jones's forces would attack the 500 or so defenders that were left in charge of Fairmont. Of course, they were quickly crushed and overran, and then Jones's brigade quickly went to work. They destroyed several strategic locations within the area and even burnt down Francis Pierpont's personal library. In fact, these attacks were so fierce and so out of nowhere, seemingly, that there was a representative in Farmington, which is a couple miles right outside of Fairmont. When he got word of this, he jumped in a wagon and literally fled all the way to behind Ohio state lines just to get away from these Confederate troops. On June 20th, 1863, West Virginia was admitted to the Union as the 35th state, but technically Pierpont was still the governor of Loyalist Virginia. Technically. And the federal government wanted him to stay the governor of Loyalist Virginia. Like, they wanted to take him out of this new state of West Virginia, put him in Virginia as their governor, even though Virginia was still overwhelmingly under the control of the Confederates. So what do you do when the federal government wants you to be in charge of a group of people that actively hate you? Well, he tried weaseling out of it, and the federal government played ball, and they said, okay, if you can find someone that meets this list of guidelines, we will not make you be the governor of Loyalist Virginia. The federal government was looking for someone who was from the pre-1863 border of Virginia, which I'm sure Francis Pierpont can name a couple thousand people that met this requirement. They also had to be loyal to the Union. That list is starting to get a little bit smaller. They wanted a political leader who had experience keeping a state together during time of war. It's probably at this point Francis Pierpont started thinking this list is getting pretty specific. Lastly, the person would have to take this position with absolutely no predetermined term limit, and the position would actually have almost no actual political power. They'd just be a figurehead that would do essentially whatever the federal government told them to. Surprisingly, Francis Pierpont couldn't find anyone to meet this requirement, so he went to Alexandria and became the governor of Loyalist Virginia. And this new capital in Alexandria would stay until 1865, when, under the direction of Andrew Jackson, the capital was moved back to Richmond, where Francis Pierpont would go and still be the governor. So essentially, Francis Pierpont was the governor of Loyalist Virginia across 3 different capitals in 6 or 7 different years. Now, when the Civil War had formally wrapped up, Francis Pierpont went about trying to pass laws to give rights back to politicians that had formerly been Confederates. And this was kind of a double-edged sword against Francis Pierpont. A lot of hardline conservatives didn't like the idea of giving the right to hold office and even the right to vote back to people who at one point were fighting in an army that was actively trying to kill loyalist Americans. And on the other side, well, these former Confederates didn't really like a lot of hardline conservatives holding political office. And former Confederates took this opportunity to take back numerous offices in both West Virginia and Virginia. After returning to West Virginia, Pierpont served in the House of Delegates for one term before losing his seat and formally retiring from politics. He was still super involved in the community. He went back to leading the Methodist Conference, and he even helped found the West Virginia Historical Society, which thank goodness for them because they make these episodes so much easier. Francis Harrison Pierpont would pass away at his daughter's home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on March 24th, 1899. 3 years later, his remains would be moved to the Woodlawn Cemetery in Fairmont, West Virginia, where he would be laid to rest by his wife, Julia. And that is a little bit of history about one of the main founding fathers of West Virginia. Now, there are numerous of these guys, and a lot of them, growing up, even though I had to take 2 or 3 years of West Virginia history in school, it wasn't until I was in college, and I use that term very loosely, that I was in college that I actually learned about some of these founding fathers and the things they did. For the most part, that is because a lot of these individuals were Republicans, which is still a very dirty word here in West Virginia. Also, if you like learning about these early founding fathers of West Virginia, I did an episode on probably one of the weirdest individuals to help found West Virginia, the designer of the state seal, Joseph d'Estabar. I assume that's how you pronounce his name. He was the first representative from Doddridge County and a French immigrant. And until next time, don't forget to stay wild, stay wonderful, and I'll talk to you later.